Chinese history is replete with examples of how it can all go to hell in a very short period of time. So I am not making a prediction on specifically how it will go down. There are just too many paths forward. Sometimes it is overnight. Sometimes it's over a year. Sometimes it's over a generation. Demographics gives us a hard stop of 10 years. So it's between now and then on some sort of time frame. As for
very soon.
Yeah, it's very, very soon. Geopolitically speaking, this is practically a blink in an eye. Demographically speaking as well. The issue to watch with China now is that their labor costs have increased at a faster clip than at any time in history in any country, including the Black Death. They're now at about 14 or 15 times the labor costs that they had back in 1999, but their labor productivity has only gone up by a factor of 2 or 3. They're dying. One-child policy 40 years on, combined with the world's most rapid urbanization, there just aren't enough people under age 35 in China left to even theoretically repopulate the country. And if the more recent data that's come out of the Chinese census is accurate, they overcounted their population in excess of 100 million people, most of whom would have been women. So we were already looking at one of the 2 or 3 most fastest aging countries in the world before this. Now they're on a completely different scale. And even with the old data, the younger data, they aged past the United States back in 2017. So we're looking at a country that is going from pre-industrial standards of subsistence agriculture to a complete post-industrial collapse within a lifetime with 20 years to spare. Let's talk about that finance model, because that kind of puts to pain the entire idea that the Chinese are good planners. They're really not. The whole idea of the Asian financial model is that capital, cash, whatever it happens to be, is a good of the state. It exists to serve political purposes, not economic ones. So in the United States, if you take out a loan, you have to show a business plan, you have to offer for collateral, and if you don't follow your plan or if you don't pay back your loan, you lose your collateral. This is what we consider normal. That is not how it works in China. In China, you have to show your employment plan. And if you can guarantee a large number of people will be working at a job, regardless of what that job does, you get money, because it's all about preventing large groups of workers from going on long walks together. Development from an American point of view is about building infrastructure, building productive capacity, serving a market, growing the business. In China, it's about achieving strategic goals, making sure that the population doesn't rebel, making sure they can dominate specific industries, not on efficiency or on cost, but simply because of mass output. So they put a lot of cash into industrial plant, not to produce anything in particular, just to produce a lot of stuff. And this is one of the many ways that the Chinese ended up going from being a backwards country to producing more steel and more cement than the rest of the world combined. As recently as 7 years ago. And then they just have to dump it on the international market because there's not even a capacity in China to absorb it all. That's incidentally one of the reasons why One Belt, One Road is out there. It's a product disposal program. There are 2 things that have dominated our world for the last 70 years. After World War II, the Americans created the globalized order, enabling anyone to trade with anyone for anything at any time and to sell in any market if in exchange you would side with us against the Soviets. And it worked, but the Cold War ended 30 years ago, and in every presidential election since, we've gone with the more populist candidate. So that's not an aberration, that's a trend. We're done. Mm-hmm. And then second, when globalization happened, it enabled the spread of capital and technology to every corner of the world. And people started moving off subsistence farms and into the cities to take manufacturing and service jobs. You do that for 70 years, and it changes everything about how you live. Most notably, when you're on the farm, kids are free labor, so you have a lot. But when you move into cities, they become very expensive moving pieces of furniture, and you have fewer because adults aren't dumb. After 70 years, most of the world now has more people in their 50s than their 40s and their 30s and their 20s. And so the consumption model that we've all grown up with and had our professional lives in, that's already over. And now the question is, what pieces of this can transition to something else? It's a pretty short list. Everything that we use in the world is transported across international borders, but that's not true for everyone. So in the case of North America, for example, we do the majority of our non-electronics manufacturing within North America. That is reshoring at an incredible rate. We are already the world's largest producer of crude oil and natural gas, and we are actually significant exporters of that as well as refined product. And we are the world's largest agricultural producer and the world's largest agricultural exporter. So there are definitely hiccups along the road. I mean, if you can't just dissolve the world in a day and expect us to not notice. We will. It will be awkward. But 5 years, 10 years from now, once this transition is passed, we'll have supply chains that are close to home that involve Mexico, Canada, and ourselves. We'll have a transport system that is largely internal, and the United States will be in a better place with stronger growth and lower inflation than any other place in the world. But we have to get there first. You don't do that overnight. The last 20 years is all in the post-Cold War system. So the first big wave of globalization was mostly among the allies during the Cold War. When the Cold War ended, most of the rest of the world came along. And so the last 20, 30 years, that has been the fastest period of growth in trade and in standards of living and in GDP in human history. It's been fantastic, but it was always artificial. So what we now have to do is that in reverse, and then some of the Cold War expansion in reverse. So we're in a world right now where there are a large number of secondary powers, whether it's China or Russia or the EU, and they're just not going to survive this transition. China's going to be the biggest splash when it goes down. The Russians will probably be the loudest, all things considered, with the war. The Europeans, there's a number of ways that can break down. Not all of them are completely horrific, but most of them are going to see a significant breakdown in Europe's ability to trade. So we're going to go from kind of a step above first amongst equals where we are now to North America, South America, and then everybody else pretty far below. We're already seeing that in the case of the Chinese system with the COVID lockdowns. Their vaccine
they're crazy.
Doesn't work. So lockdowns are their only option to avoid millions of deaths. I mean, look at Omicron B. I mean, we've kind of forgotten about this in the United States. We've stopped caring about it back in January. But Omicron B is the most communicable pathogen we've ever had. And Omicron B is the most lethal of the COVID variants to date. Now, everyone in the United States either has the vaccine or natural antibodies or both. China has neither of those. So if they open up, they're just absolutely screwed. But you're seeing some version of this going on elsewhere with security issues, with energy issues, with food issues. And so those supply chains that we thought were inviolable no longer are. But most importantly, and we haven't gotten to this stage yet, we're used to trade, physical transport on the water being safe and cheap. And that's just not the case anymore. We had the Europeans stepped up to the plate with their oil embargo for Russian crude this week. And the most important part of that is they're banning all insurance for all vessels that carry Russian product. That's the start of the unraveling of what makes transport globally. Mm-hmm. And since in the case of manufactured goods, the average product crosses international borders 100 times. And in East Asia, every single one of those crossings is by water. The ability of this to disintegrate very quickly is something we have not priced in.